Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Elcott Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry. Delighted to have with us today Cliff Henson, Corporate Vice President of Cloud Supply Chain and Engineering at Microsoft, top one leader in the Supply Chain Awards 2025 of Elcott Global, and one of the best supply chain professionals globally. His work is the critical backbone for Azure, Microsoft 365, and Copilot. His team and himself manage millions of servers across over 400 global data center campuses. And Cliff was brought into Microsoft to implement what at that time was a very important decision at Microsoft, a shift from the buy to a make model in cloud, transforming really that decision transformed the global cloud supply chain from a cost center into a strategic growth engine. So Cliff will tell us more about that. Welcome, Cliff, and great to have you.
Hey, Radu, so glad to be here, and thanks for having me. This is always an honor to share some of my story and also to learn from others, right? But yeah, just really excited to be here and talk about some of the great things that I've done over my career. I guess some of the key decision points in my career, and then also some of the great work we've been able to do as a team at Microsoft.
Super. And let's start there. Let's start with your career because everybody has some inflection points. And you've been around for a long time. I didn't present all your roles and all your achievements, but out of curiosity, when you look back in your 30 plus years of experience, what were those inflection points for you that make the most difference to where you are today?
Well, I'll tell you, in college, I actually wanted to be a doctor. And at that point, I was kind of forced to go the engineering route because my dad said, I'm not going to pay for you to go to medical school and all that, but I'll help you out if you want to be an engineer. Got out of school and I worked as an engineer for about 3 years and realized I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And at that point, I had a decision of go to medical school or to go get my MBA because I love the math and business side and made the choice to actually go get my MBA with a specialization in finance. So I had one of those major choice points very, very early in my career when just being an engineer wasn't enough for what my goal was.
It's always a fair economic and financial decision, if the parents say so. So, um,
Exactly.
and I need to probe, how did you end up in supply chain specifically?
Yeah, when I first started out, it wasn't really called supply chain. It was actually called
Yes,
manufacturing.
yes.
And since I was a mechanical engineer, and then I went and got my MBA, and I realized I liked being in products, and I liked more of the high tech. I worked in the oil and gas industry for a while, and then realized that I didn't want to be in the ups and downs in the oil and gas industry, and joined Compaq, and that was back in 1993. So that was really before a lot of this wave that we're on right now, what's happened over the last, what, 30, 33 years or so, not 32 years. We've just seen so much change in the IT space. But yeah, it was when I started at Compaq and came into the company and actually was working in a manufacturing type role because at that point, all companies did their own manufacturing. And it was interesting because I had had an engineering background, had an MBA. I started moving around in the company, and I went into different roles. I went into R&D since I had that background. I did some work in mergers and acquisition. I did some product marketing roles. I spent a lot of my early years just rotating into different parts. I'll say this Indian value chain, learning as much as I could. And that
Yeah.
really helped me later on in my career because a lot of people, as you know, they get into a certain vertical and they'll just continue to get promoted and stay in that vertical and they'll reach a point where they can't go any higher. And I kind of knew early on, since I'd made the decision to go back and get my MBA, is my goal was to be like a COO of a company. That's what I set as my target. And I realized I couldn't just be in one discipline. I had to learn across the entire value chain from sales to operations to customer support, all those areas. So that's kind of how I ended up starting at Compaq. And I moved around to lots of different roles. I was actually the interesting thing that happened, I was in a strategy role. And I was defining the worldwide strategy for the supply chain and spent a lot of time traveling around the world and setting up what our Asia Pacific supply chain was at Compaq. And we built server and storage products back then, both mostly servers, and had defined that strategy of how we were going to do a different way of manufacturing, more regional manufacturing. And my boss at the time, who ran the supply chain for Compaq, she said, "Well, would you like to go implement this in the Americas?" And I said, "Sure, that would be great." So I went from being in a strategy role, the guy coming up with all the strategies, actually getting to move into the region and implement the strategy I had defined for a worldwide strategy in the Americas, and it worked out great. So that was a lot of fun, and that was another one of those choice points that I'm glad I made that choice and decision to move into that role.
What a story. And even if we didn't align at all with this, I'm so glad you said it. So about 3 years ago, you may know, we put out a book, From Source to Solve. And the book was a collection of interviews, really, of CEOs and COOs. And we asked them what made you successful, but all from supply chain. And there were 5 elements, not to go into each, but holistic. Holistic came about again and again. And holistic really means end to end. And exactly to your
Mhm.
point, that a lot of professionals go into one segment. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with it, right? If you want to become the chief procurement officer, if you want to become the head of manufacturing, clearly you need to have deep expertise within that. But I love how, if I'm now to go big picture on what you shared, what I'm hearing, you had a target, which was I want to be CEO or CSEO. And then you kind of build the building blocks, the fundamentals of how do I have that end-to-end and holistic experience that would enable me to then truly lead an overall organization, which you can't have
Mhm.
if you just stay in one function. Both paths are perfectly fine, but we just need to be clear that in order to be a CEO board member, you must have an end-to-end holistic understanding of the business and of the overall. So great, great
Yeah, and
sharing.
it's so interesting because I've talked to people, whether they're college hires or new people that have been on board for a while, and they're so anxious to get promoted. And I just tell them this is a time for learning. And you just rotate into different roles. And it's so much easier when you're at lower levels to rotate into different roles than it is when you get to higher levels, where that expertise is required to actually make the right decisions. People aren't going to take a gamble if you really don't know the vertical of the space. But if you're at lower levels, you can learn it and then continue to grow and rotate into different roles. I mean, I did R&D, I was in mergers and acquisitions, I was in strategy, I was in operations, product marketing. I mean, I was kind of end to end. I did a lot of the things across the
That's
company, and it helped me understand from the customer viewpoint back into the company decisions that we needed to make to really lead and be number one in our space.
love it. Now on the make versus buy
Mhm.
decision within Microsoft, and that decision was taken, and then you joined them. I wanted to probe a little bit because most companies go the other way around. Yeah, so they, especially the last many years, there's been an outsourcing wave of everything. So why did Microsoft decide to do that, and what was the ROI or the perceived financial? Because there's always a financial tipping point and justification for the massive capex that they needed to do to make go for this decision.
Sure. So I had worked at HP and we were building the racks, and some of our customers were like Microsoft. We were shipping them thousands and thousands of racks a year. And if you think about the buildup of a rack, you've got processors, memory, hard drives, maybe SSDs, motherboards, power supplies, all these components that go into building this up. And obviously, they were buying that at a price. And they were looking at our expertise around the design and then the manufacture and deliver a finished good product. There's obviously margin in that. And in the IT space, it's a pretty healthy margin. Now, I don't know exactly what Microsoft was looking at from their side, and I don't want to disclose what my previous company's margins were, but it was a healthy margin. And it was enough to where Microsoft made the decision that a lot of that product was designed for all companies. And what Microsoft wanted to do was design only for the cloud and their use cases. So they were able to take a lot of things out of the design that was a general purpose server and make it just needed for their applications, which then further reduced the cost and made it unique for them. And since their scale was going to be large enough, they thought they could go get really good pricing. So I was actually over there at the HPE side and ended up going to work for Microsoft to help them go build that supply chain. And actually joined in February 18th of 2020. It was 1 week before we shut the campus down because of the pandemic. And it was a
Good
very
timing
interesting
then.
time.
Yeah.
I met my team one time, but we had a very, very young supply chain. I mean, very young. Some of the stuff was probably run on an Excel spreadsheets. And it was great that first couple of months dealing with the challenges that we had, because it really helped me understand all the problems that we had, because we were basically in firefights every day for 2 months straight, 7 days a week. And then at the end of that 2 months, I was able to put together a 3-year strategy around here's what's required to become best in class in all these categories that we were looking at, whether it was cycle time or resiliency in our supply chain or whatever those categories. There was 6 major categories. And I went to our CEO and his staff and just walked through where are we today? Here's what best in class looks like, and these are the actions required to get us there. And they said, where do I sign? We signed off, and then we went on the journey of building a world-class supply chain. And obviously it was a lot of fun because you don't get to do that very often in your career, and especially at the size and the scale of a Microsoft. So it was a lot of fun. But we learned that during the pandemic, all the challenges that we had to go quickly change and go build up a world-class supply chain. So yeah, I think the decision was number one, there's margin. Number two, it's a unique design that's unique for the Microsoft Cloud. And then number three, controlling our own destiny. Because I can tell you, once we got things ramped up around the pandemic, we were one of the first movers back in to the North America ecosystem. And we didn't have any other impact because of what was going on in other parts of the world because of the shutdowns. So I think just building resilience and being a first mover was one of the key things that we did just to protect the company and our customers, because our customers are stock market, airlines, you name it, first responders, hospitals. I mean, they require capacity to be able to run their business. So we
Mm.
had to make sure that we were able to deliver on that.
Now, I have another question. So, our main business, our primary business at Elcott is executive searches in the talent business, finding the right people. Now, when you make such transitions and you're building a muscle you didn't have, or Microsoft didn't have before, you need to build an organizational structure. You need to build talent, just like they brought you from HP, that can do that. So maybe share with us some of the learnings, the wins, as well as the learnings in that process of building the capabilities internally, the talent, the skills in Microsoft Cloud internal team.
Sure. I think any good leader that comes in, the first thing they looked at is how is my team structured? What are the roles and responsibilities and the priorities for the organization? And then they look at their team. Who do I have now that I've set up the right roles? When I first came here, the roles were set up very differently. And I went in and made it very simple around a plan, source, make, deliver, reverse logistics type structure instead of the way it was kind of really fragmented. There was overlapping roles and responsibilities. So the first thing was a structure that most of the supply chains have today. Number two was, what were their roles and responsibilities, metrics that we could align to. And then third, I sat down with each of the leaders and said, tell me what your plan is. And I had to bring some people in from the outside because number one, there maybe wasn't a talent internally once we redid the org structure the way it needed to be. And then the other one was I had some people that just couldn't scale to the level that was needed and had to go outside and bring some additional talent in. So obviously, I've been in the industry a long time. I've got people I've known throughout lots of different companies and was able to go out and recruit and find some new talent to bring in and help us on that journey. Whether it was our IT systems, because I'm not only the chief supply chain officer, but I'm also the CIO for the cloud supply chain. So I have my own engineering teams that do all the ERP systems and all of our own custom code. So that's a nice thing to have, but you got to have the right talent as well to go drive that.
Yes, yes. And I know, and in the case study that really was a standout case study for our awards, you talked about AI agents and you talked about how how you implemented, maybe to give some context for the full audience. So your teams logged over 7,000 hours of AI training, deployed 26 operational agents, and the goal is that you'll scale that to 100 within a short period of time. And I think you spoke at length of this being a human-led adoption, not a top-down type of an
Mhm.
adoption. What I wanted to ask you is what were some of the most significant benefits that you see from having deployed AI agents? And to the best of my knowledge, everybody talks about it. You're one of the very, very few companies that have
Mhm.
done it. And how has it changed the way that you do supply chain at Microsoft Cloud?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit of an aha moment when we were building this out and working on this. So I told you I'm like a CIO, I've got my own engineering organization, and I've got traditional IT program management that as you do a rollout and you're implementing something, it usually takes about 12 months. When you do the business requirements document, you go through and scope the engineering work, then you do the user acceptance test and you roll it out. 12, 14 months usually, right? For some of these functionality that you need. And I was in a room and we were starting to work our agents and we had the prompt part being done. And then we were looking at different use cases of how to roll out the agents. And we had this very critical need that we needed to get done very quickly to support something within our operation. And I had the leader that's doing kind of my AI and custom code, and I had the leader that's doing some of my ERP functionality. And I said, how long will it take to put this capability in that's needed to go support our customers and to scale our volumes? Our volumes were like doubling. And the answer was 12 to 14 months. And I was like, we have to do it faster than that. And I turned to my team that was building the agents and I said, how long would it take you? The answer was 6 weeks. Long pause in the room, right? And they're like, how could you do it in 6 weeks? And we completely changed how we deploy that software. And the user acceptance test was done in a week. The business requirements document was done in a matter of days. So we completely turned upside down the old way of how you would roll out a project and all the work that's done to something that's much simpler, faster. And we may have to deploy two agents or three, but you can do some of those concurrently versus a big, long project. And I think that was at the point when we realized, wow, we can go get a significant time to value advantage here if we deploy agents and take care of whatever customer needs we might have. And that was kind of the game changer of the amount of time it takes to deploy and how quick you can get the value. So as we looked at that, we had lots of areas that we were looking at. And what I did is I had every one of my direct reports in their different functional areas around the plan, source, make, deliver, different areas. And I said, come up with your top 5 pain points that you have, or new capabilities, things that don't work that you want to have done. And so we took that as a list, and then we were able to go through and vet that list with these are the projected savings, man hour savings, speed, whatever it might be. And so then we had this list of all these projects, but then we only had a handful of software engineers that could go work on it. So then I had to make the decision of I took 10% of my software engineering team from my traditional engineering team, and I said, you are now going to be deployed in a separate organization to go write the code that's required to build agents. And that was about 100 people that we took and we redeployed into this group. And then we set that group up as their own little team. And then they were then challenged to go deploy against this list that we had put together. And so I'll give you an example. One of the items on the list was something that's redundant. We have like 6 to 8 people in our logistics team that every day they're looking at emails that are coming in from freight forwarders and whoever on this address is wrong or validating information. They would have to go in and check and type back and send an email response. Well, we built an agent that typically just looks at the email, scans it for the information. It's been trained to go then reply and take action. And so those 6 people, their job within 6 weeks was no longer needed.
Yeah.
That is now being done in the email sense through our agent. And then we took that use case and we said, how many other areas are we seeing like supplier requests come in or other areas with email requests like product data management or whatever it might be? Can we use that agent that was built to deploy across these different use cases where you're scanning emails to pull out information and take action? So that's how it went from actually one use case. Now we've deployed that across 7 different activities that have a similar theme around taking information from emails and acting. That's just, one example that we've done. And like I said, one of those was 7 resources that were working that full time. And then if you just look at scaling that across your team, it's significant. Now, I can tell you our volumes have significantly increased the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years. We have not added any headcount. We've actually reduced our headcount. And we've been growing at significant CAGRs year over year. And the reason we were able to go deploy and work all this volume is because we've been rolling out agents and doing more and more automation. So yeah, I think for us, the aha moment I talked about, the fact that we can quickly deploy these, get the value, and we call them squads. It's an agent squad that's got 2 software engineers with a business representative that work together to go deploy these agents, define it, write the code, and then deploy it. And they can get all that done within 6 weeks.
Amazing. And because I can already hear people listening to this podcast and thinking to themselves, yes, but the good old but you're Microsoft. You have amazing resources and you have, infinite to the point of infinite in their minds. Usually we've come up with excuses. So I wanna send you a challenge, Cliff, a challenge question. So if you were in a 200, 300, $500 million company and leading the supply chain, how would you do this? And perhaps even nailing the question even further, what would be one agent that you would deploy? How would you nail on that one? And you are unlikely to have your own resources, right? And how would you simplify this process for those people listening that they might be stuck in their own minds? Because there's a way to do this even if you don't have the resources of Microsoft. So I'm putting you in their shoes and asking you, how would you do it if you were them?
I don't know if I could say one agent to go deploy. I think they would have to go through and look at where are their pain points. It could be something around product data management. It could be sourcing. It could be supplier information. It could be data cleanup, right? There's lots of areas that you can go deploy agents to go work on that information. I gave a very simple example of something that was one of the first agents we deployed because it was pretty simple. And while I had the ability to go move resources from one team to another, I've had this question at other companies because we do host companies that want to learn how we're doing agents or some of the other things, sustainability, whatever it might be, just information sharing. And I've told them just go talk to your CIO and tell them I'd like to take some of the resources we have today working these big projects and pull some people from that program to go have a handful of people create a squad to go focus on building agents for the business. Let me give the prioritization of what I want and then let them go build the agents. And at least then you've got some control and your CIO will more than likely be all on board because he understands how long it takes to deploy some of these capabilities. And it is a long time and it needs to be shorter.
Mm, mm. So if I can draw some key messages is number one, know your pain point and where inside the organization you're going to get the fastest and easy to measure ROI that you can get buy-in. Two, influence and partner with the CIO so that you get the internal help to build it because ultimately it is a teamwork and both of you would get benefits out of it.
Yeah, and I think the third thing is most companies like a Microsoft or Google or other peers that we have, they all have something called like an AI foundry. It's kind of the engine that builds the agents. It's very difficult to go do that on your own. And that's why I'm saying there's lots of companies that already have these capabilities. So I would recommend instead of trying to go build your own, go out and find someone that already has the engine built, that has all the security protocols and all the information, the ability for agents to communicate to each other, All that has already been written. It'd be like going out and trying to create your own PowerPoint. Somebody's already done it, right? I'm just going to use that capability, but I'm going to input all the data into it. And that's what you have to do once you get that agent set up is you've got to define it. You've got to put the information of where does it go to look for info, your data sources,
Mm,
and
mm,
then it will take action that you define.
mm.
And like I said, there's a lot of companies that have that capability already set up today. I would go leverage what they have versus trying to create your own.
Yeah, practical. Another common challenge or objection that I hear is how will we get our teams, our planners, to trust a black box recommendation from an agent? Maybe some of this will have multi-million dollar impacts. How
Mhm.
did you tackle that? How did you get your teams to start trusting these intelligent algorithms?
I think you've got to go through the process. So we started with prompts, being able to ask a question and get information. Then we moved up to now I have an agent that's taking action, and I define the guardrails of the action that it can take. I look at it and say, okay, you can go send this email, you can do this query, you can pull this information, you can take action, and I can define the action. The third step is called the autonomous agentic agents. And that's when you tell this agent you can work with other agents and take actions, and I'm giving you kind of the guardrails of the actions. I've told my team, let's look at each phase. And then even today, we have it to where it'll stop and let a human validate, and then it'll say, go ahead and move forward. It'll give you what it's going to do. It'll say, this is my action. This is what I want to go do. You can put a step for a human to validate it and then let it go take the action. So that's one way to make sure you're validating before you press the go ahead and take that action. You can get the agent set up to where it'll take that step. But once you've done it a few times and you realize 99% of the time it's correct. And oh, by the way, if it makes a bad decision, I've put guardrails. Like, for example, I'm not going to let it go place a PO for $1 billion that I have a bunch of excess and obsolescence. I've got guardrails around what it can place and the level of that. So that's what you would have to do. Start out with the prompts, go to the agentic AI agents, put the guardrails in place, and then you could have it stop and somebody approve it. And the third is then turn it to where it's autonomous and it can work on its own and work with other agents. That's where you start really getting the value and the speed that I think we're going to need over the next 3 to 4 years. And I do believe that if companies don't adopt this technology and capabilities, they will be left behind.
Significantly left behind. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in consulting, and I think this applies irrespective of industries. In my head, at least, he was saying that for the industry that he was working on, it was one of the global leaders, so they were expecting to get 10 to 20% efficiency gains. Now, 10 to 20% efficiency gains means one, you can make your product cheaper. you really you really outbid the competition. It means that you can maybe make it maybe 50% cheaper, and 50% you invest more into your own organization. But whatever, the bottom line is you are having a significant competitive advantage. And whilst most companies and most of the talk on AI, my perception is that it's for now buzzwords and glitzy and so on. And unlike Microsoft, most companies say they're doing it, but they're not really doing it or achieving results. When this comes, and that point will come at scale, it's going to really make a difference. You can't copy anymore. Like, you're going to be so advanced that the second, third, whatever, they can't just copy your strategy and hope that they can catch up, because the leaders will
Mhm.
be too far out. And that's a business, potentially business existent risk.
So, Radu, one thing I should have probably said at the beginning, one of the processes that we use before we go to find agents is we actually go through a lean process. So we go through and look at the end-to-end value stream of what this process is, and we go through and make sure we lean it out, because a lot of times you don't want to automate things that don't make sense or have agents do things that don't make sense. So I'd always say the first step is know the process, go through and lean it out, do a Kaizen activity, whatever it might be, get it down to what's needed, and then look at what does my agent need to do, because that will take a lot of the work out on having to code things that aren't really necessary. So that's the other key one that I would say. We actually call our program Lean plus AI. That's what we call it. So we lean it out and then we apply the AI on after we've leaned out the process.
That's love it. Thanks for making that loud and clear, because there's no point to make something super efficient that should not be done in the first place. It's not useful at all.
Exactly.
So great point, Cliff. Well, on that note, pleasure having you. Thanks for all the great examples and very practical advices that you shared, Cliff, and keep doing a great work at Microsoft.
Hey, thank you, Radu. And I really enjoyed having the conversation. There's a lot of articles out there about AI. I just try to learn every day and listen to podcasts like this one so I can take that back to my team and continue to get smarter and try to stay ahead of the competition. So thank you.
My pleasure. Once again, this is Radu Palamariu. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you're listening it on iTunes, Spotify, or any other channel, we'd love if you leave us a review. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.